Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year, Gemar Chatima Tova. Thank you very much for regathering so that we can share with one another our presence and our gifts of our insights and sharing the words of Torah with one another. This week we are in Parshat Vayeilech, which is a short Torah portion. It is chapter 31 of the book of Deuteronomy. There are only about, I think, 30 verses in our Torah portion. So as we go through our shared reading, if everyone reads just a couple of verses, that will give an opportunity for, I think, all of us to share in the vocalization of our Torah portion. And again, I'm very grateful that everyone has come together to share one another. And I'd like to take this time really to first dedicate this week's study session of Torah to an individual who was profoundly a great influence and had great impact on me, who died just yesterday. And that is Yaakov Basner, who lived in Seal Beach. Yaakov Basner was born in 1927 in Riga, Latvia. And he attended a Hebrew elementary school and then attended a Yiddish high school. And I know that there's nothing more than that he would have loved to have done than to have grown up in Riga, immersed in his Yiddish world, his Yiddish culture, and to have spent a life of just love and joy with the woman that he met as a girl, Doba. The two of them would just have loved to have just spent their lives together there in Riga and just enjoyed all the culture, the rich culture that community was. But of course, it was not to be. When the Nazis invaded Latvia, Doba's family fled to the Soviet Union, and Yaakov's family was all caught up and arrested by the Nazis. And Yaakov, on his 13th birthday, bore witness to much of his family being shot and killed by the Nazis. And then Yaakov himself was taken to a concentration camp. And Yaakov actually survived 5 different Nazi concentration camps until he was finally liberated from Theresienstadt in May of 1945. When Yaakov was liberated in 1945, he returned to Riga and miraculously was able to reunite with Doba, and the two of them got married. And after the war, Latvia was taken over by the Soviet Union, and under the Soviet occupation, Yaakov was arrested by the Soviets for a crime of, well, an economic crime of probably having tried to earn money outside of the prescribed limitations of Soviet rule. And he was sent to a Soviet prison camp where he spent 2 years. So after surviving 5 years in 5 different Nazi concentration camps, he survives 2 years in Soviet prison, and finally is able to come to the United States. He settles in Long Beach, California in 1980 with Doba, and they have a family. And Yaakov dedicated himself to the sharing and teaching of the Yiddish language and Yiddish culture and Yiddish literature. And he did that at the Workmen's Circle, at the University of Judaism, at the California Institute for Jewish Culture and Language, and of course at many different community centers and congregations throughout Southern California. Yaakov was an embodiment of a culture that was really destroyed by the Nazis. And he was determined to see its revival and to extend it, to teach it, to share it with others. Yaakov was a beautiful man. He was a treasure. And it was one of the richest experiences I had as a congregational rabbi to sit with him and to just look into his beautiful eyes, to hear him tell his stories, and to sense his own sense of resilience and his commitment to a beautiful way of life and a beautiful culture. So Yaakov died yesterday, at the age of 93, and I'd like to extend and honor him by dedicating this study to him. So with that, I invite all of us, as we unmute and say our blessings, to realize that when we're giving thanks for this opportunity of immersing ourselves in Divrei Torah and matters of Torah, it's not just the words written on the text, it's also all of the creativity, all of the life, all of the relationships that emerge out of this encounter that we have with one another and with this wonderful rich heritage which Yaakov Bassner so beautifully represented. So let's take into our hearts and minds all of those who have contributed to the conversation we call a holy life, all those who have added to our lives, added to our understanding, who have made our lives richer. And we're going to thank the source of all life for all those, for these words, for the words as they come off the page and become embodied in people's lives and in our relationships with one another. So I invite you to go ahead and unmute, and together we say our blessing. Baruch
atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech
haolam
asher
kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity of immersing ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I invite everyone to go ahead and go back onto mute as we read through our Torah portion, Parshat Vayeilech, chapter 31 of the book of Deuteronomy. And again, if we each read just a few verses, then we'll have an opportunity for everyone to read through our Torah portion. We'll begin. Moses went and spoke these words to all of Israel. He said to them, I am 120 years old today. And then Mark Thompson, would you like to read a few verses?
Thank you, Rabbi. My translation says, I can no longer be active. Is that the same as what you read, basically?
That's fine.
Moreover, Adonai has said to me, you shall not go across yonder Jordan. Adonai, your God himself, will cross over before you, and he himself will wipe out those nations from your path, and you shall dispossess them. Joshua is the one who shall cross before you, as Adonai has spoken.
Thank you so much. Margaret, would you like to read a couple of verses there?
Sure. The Lord will do to them as he did to Sihon, Og, kings of the Amorites, and to their countries. And when he has wiped them out, the Lord will deliver them up to you, and you shall deal with them in accordance with the instructions that I have enjoined upon you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Dave Leb, would you like to read a few verses starting there?
Be strong and resolute. Be not in fear or in dread of them, for the Lord your God himself marches with you. He will not fail you or forsake you.
Thank you so much. Now we're at verse 7. And Richard Kramer, would you like to read a few verses starting there?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Then Moses called Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and resolute, for it is you who shall go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their fathers to give to them, and it is you who shall apportion it to them.
Thank you so much. Okay, and Paul, would you like to read at that spot there?
Number 8.
At 8, yes, and you'll have to unmute.
Hashem, it is he who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not release you, nor will he forsake you. Do not be afraid and do not be dismayed.
Thank you, Paul. And Jim, would you like to read there, starting at verse 9?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Moses wrote down the teaching and gave it to the priests, sons of Levi, who carried the ark of Adonai's covenant, and to all the elders of Israel. And Moses instructed them as follows: every 7th year, the year set for remission, at the Feast of Booths.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Sherry, would you like to read there, verse 11? And Steve as well, then you can share.
Thank you. When all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God in the place that he will choose, you shall read this teaching aloud in the presence of all Israel. Gather the people, men, women, children, and the strangers in your communities, that they may hear and so learn to revere the Lord your God and to observe faithfully every word of this teaching.
There are children too who have not the experience shall hear and learn to revere the Lord your God, as long as they live in the land that you are about to cross the Jordan to possess.
Thank you. And let me invite Mark Levinstein. Would you like to read starting there at verse 14?
Yes, thank you. The Lord said to Moses, the time is drawing near for you to die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tent of meeting, that I may instruct him. Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tent of meeting.
Thank you so much. Steve, would you like to read starting there at verse 15?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The Eternal appeared in the tent in a pillar of cloud, the pillar of cloud having come to rest at the entrance of the tent. The Eternal said to Moses, you are soon to lie with your ancestors. This people will thereupon go astray after the alien gods in their midst in the land that they are about to enter. They will forsake me and break my covenant that I made with them.
Thank you. And Robin, right there at verse 17.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Then my anger will flare up against them, and I will abandon them and hide my countenance from them. They shall be ready prey, and many evils and troubles shall befall them. And they shall say on that day, surely it is because our God is not in our midst that these evils have befallen us.
And go ahead, one more verse.
Yet I will keep my countenance hidden on that day because of all the evil they have done in turning to other gods.
Thank you. And David and Susan there, starting at verse 19.
And now write you this song and teach it to the Israelites. Put it in their mouths so that this song will be a witness against the Israelites. When I bring them to the soil that I swore to their fathers, flowing with milk and honey, and they eat and are sated and grow sleek and turn to other gods and worship them and despise me and break my covenant, shall be when many evils and troubles find them, this song shall testify before them as witness, for it shall not be forgotten in the mouth of their seed, that I knew their devisings, that they do today before I brought them into the land which I vowed.
And Moses wrote this song on that day, and he taught it to the children of Israel. And he commanded Joshua, son of Nun, and he said, be strong and bold, because you will bring the children of Israel to the land that I swore to them, and I shall be with you.
Thank you so much. And Jay Iser, would you like to read a couple verses at verse 24?
Thank you, Rabbi. When Moses had put down in writing the words of this teaching to the very end, Moses charged the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, saying, "Take this book of teaching and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, and let it remain there as a witness against you."
Thank you. Let me invite.
Well, I know how to fight.
Let me invite Justin to read a little bit there at verse 27.
Thank you, Rabbi. For I know your rebellious spirit and your stubbornness, even while I live with you today. You are rebelling against the Lord, and surely after my death. Assemble to me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, and I will speak these words into their ears, and I will call upon heaven and the earth as witness against them.
Thank you. And Cheryl, if you could read verse 29, then I'll invite Deb to read our concluding verse.
Thank you, Rabbi. For I know that when I am dead, you will act wickedly and turn away from the path that I enjoined upon you, and that in time to come misfortune will befall upon you for having done evil in the sight of Adonai, whom you vexed by your deeds.
Thank you. And Deb, would you like to read our concluding verse?
I appreciate it. I have the study sheet, but I don't have the parasha pulled up. I
Thank you
apologize.
so much. Let me just share then. Our last verse is Moses spoke the words of this song into the ears of the entire congregation of Israel until their conclusion. And that is our Torah portion for this week. And so I'd like to share with you a little bit of a focused study, and then we'll have an opportunity for everyone to share their particular thoughts and reflections on the words that we've just read. And if you have the study sheet, I'd like to point out the painting that we have at the top. It is a painting called Redemption Song, and it's by a Mexican artist, Rene Serrano Rodriguez. And Rene Serrano Rodriguez was born in Mexico in 1975. He studied art in several places in Europe and then returned to Mexico, where he lives today, producing some very beautiful abstract art. And I chose this for a couple of reasons. One, because the title of his painting, Redemption Song, and we're going to be exploring through our study here something about the elemental aspect of the universe, which music is. And so I was drawn to his painting, which he entitles Redemption Song, as there's this image here of, it looks like to me as an expanding world, an expanding universe. And the fact that he attributes this notion of song to this generative image, and in particular, the fact that he describes it as a redemption song, it intrigued me greatly. What further intrigued me is a little comment that he has about his painting. It's quoted there underneath. It says, "Time and music always persists." And one of the things that intrigued me about it is that one would think that grammatically the verb should be in the plural, because we've got seemingly two nouns as the subjects, time and music, and yet the verb is in the singular, persists. And that intrigued me because it got me to kind of having this feeling that our artist, Rene Serrano Rodriguez, has this understanding that there is this unity, if you will, of time and music, that music is such an elemental aspect of the universe as is time. So I was kind of taken by that. We're going to be exploring this notion about music and its relationship to the universe in the course of our focused study together. And I've entitled our study sheet, "These Songs of Freedom." And we'll see what role song plays in this week's Torah portion, what that song might be, and how it connects with the ongoing procreation of life. So in number one on the study sheet, I note that in our Torah portion this week, we have three different expressions of communication that are being shared by Moses. The first, Moses went and spoke these words. And that's how our Torah portion opens up. And then a few verses later, it says, Moses wrote this Torah and gave it to the Kohanim and to all the elders of Israel. And then finally, towards the end, Moses wrote this song on that day and taught it to the children of Israel. So I was fascinated that we have Moses speaking words, we have him writing words, which are here translated as writing a Torah, and this is something that he gives to the elite of the community, the Kohanim and the elders. And then finally, he writes a song, and the song is what he teaches to all the people of Israel. So we're going to be exploring over the next few minutes. We'll be looking at what is the content of this song that Moses teaches to everyone. But first, I want to explore a little bit that form of what song is. And in number 2 on the study sheet, I have a bit of commentary from a 19th century rabbi known as the Netziv. Netziv is an acronym for Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin in Belarus, where he served for 40 years. The Netziv was born in 1817 and died in 1893. He was a great scholar and much beloved. So this is a very fascinating bit of commentary from the Netziv. He wrote at one point, "There is a distinction between poetry and prose. In poetry, the subject matter is not plainly set forth as in prose. Additional explanations are necessary in order to indicate the allusions condensed into each expression. Such is the nature of Torah. Its story is not elaborated. It requires additional explanations in order to appreciate its allusions." So here we have the Netziv, who's indicating that Torah is not what it might look like if we just open up a book, which is a clear, linear explication of either a story or of instructions. The Netziv says it's really an extended poem. And as with any poem, you can't appreciate the richness of what it's trying to share with us merely by reading straight through. The words themselves are not self-evident. The meaning of the words are not self-evident. It requires some probing. It requires some explanation. It's full of allusions. And of course, these allusions are things that no single individual can share. That they require explications by each one of us. Each one of us is going to see something different. We're going to be attuned to something different. And that's why we get together to share all this, so that we can appreciate the richness that is contained within this poem. So the nature of a poem I want to suggest is what a song is. A song is a poem that has a through line. It has a melody attached to it. And if you turn over, we have a similar commentary from a more contemporary rabbi, Rabbi Marc-Alain Wachtin. Rabbi Marc-Alain Wachtin was born in Paris in 1957, and his father was Rabbi Jacques Wachtin, who was born in Marrakesh. And Marc-Alain Wachtin's son is also a rabbi. He became actually the chief rabbi of a number of cities in southern France. And Marc-Alain Wachtin is both a philosopher and a rabbi, and he's deeply immersed in Kabbalah. He's written some beautiful, beautiful books. And one of them is The Mysteries of Kabbalah. And let me share with you this excerpt from that book. Reality is not static. and does not consist of eternal essences that can be understood by means of fixed concept. It is the constantly unfolding future of life which bursts forth and renews itself. One cannot perceive reality unless it is by using a language and images that are constantly in motion. Poetry seeks to restore vibration to words whose life has become motionless. Here, Rabbi Mark Alain Wachtan is conveying to us this notion that we have these experiences, we have these insights, we have these encounters, and then we seek to share them, to convey them to others. And when we do that in writing, they become, if you will, rigidified into this format we call words. And then we think we know as a reader what that word means because, well, we've used that word before. But what Rabbi Wachtan is suggesting is that that's why poetry is so important, because it's somewhat subversive in terms of our thinking that we understand what a certain word means. And it's subversive in the sense that it sometimes puts together words that normally get put together. And sometimes it'll defy rules of syntax and grammar and construction. And this causes us to spend more time and realize maybe I don't understand the words. Maybe I shouldn't just take for granted what's going on here and spend some more time on it and allow me to dig deeper into it. And I think that's what he means when he says, poetry seeks to restore a vibration to words whose life has become motionless. So poetry and song, I want to suggest, has to do with this notion of the vibrational impact that poetry and song can have for us. That universe itself is constantly expanding. We know this now from modern physics. It's not settled. It's not resolved. It's not finite. It's not fixed. It's in constant turmoil and tension and growth and expansion and chaos. And what our two commentators have suggested is that in order to capture the universe itself, you need a language that is equally unsettled, vibrational, somewhat chaotic, full of expansion, and that is poetry and song. And so now that we have explored a little bit the form that this particular last bit of communication that Moses is sharing in our Torah portion, that of song, I want to explore, well, what exactly is the content of this song? And so there in number 4, I have our verse from our Torah portion. Now, therefore, write down this song. And so the question is, well, what is the song that he wrote down? And first we have our great medieval commentator, Rashi, who says, this song refers to Ha'azinu, which is next week's Torah portion. And that is Deuteronomy 32:1 through 43. That's, according to Rashi, that's what the song is that Moses was teaching to the Israelite people. But in the Talmud, we have a different point of view that's expressed. And in Masechet Nedarim, in the volume Nedarim, it picks up on our verse from this week's Torah portion and concludes it, noting it also says, and teach it to the children of Israel. Place it in their mouth so that this song may be a witness for me among the children of Israel. My translation is slightly different from what we read in our portion in our publications here. Some of these editions rendered as a witness against the children of Israel. But I think it's better translated this way, that it's a witness for me among the children of Israel. That is, it's supposed to speak among the children of Israel as a reminder of something, as a testimony, as a bit of witnessing. So the Talmud explores this very same verse and says, it's not just Ha'azinu that this song refers to, it's the entirety of Torah. This makes clear that the song is the entire Torah. So the Talmud here is envisioning that Moses at this point is singing all of Torah to the Israelite people, and that he's teaching them this song because when they're lost, when they're struggling, when they're tempted, when they go astray, when they forget, sing this song and you'll be brought back in alignment with the holy purpose. Interestingly enough, Jewish tradition, as expressed most succinctly by Moses Maimonides, says that the 613th mitzvah is the one that's based on this verse that we just read, Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 19. This notion of teaching a song and placing it in their mouths so that it will be a song as a witness among the Israelite people. Based upon that verse, Jewish tradition says, the 613th mitzvah is that each person within the Israelite community is supposed to write this song, is supposed to carry on this song, is supposed to write a Torah. And that's why it's become a very beautiful custom for many communities to commission the writing of a Torah for that particular community, and for members of the community to actually have a hand, literally, in the writing of letters of that Torah in order to fulfill this commandment. So this notion of our concluding commandment, if you will, the final commandment is we are to take up this song. We are to sing this book. We are to fulfill ourselves and regain our sense of alignment and direction by singing this song. It's good to take a step back to appreciate how profoundly influential this song we call Torah has been to peoples and cultures throughout time and across the globe. Certainly this country, the United States of America, is one profoundly influenced by the Torah. Its verses inscribed on the Liberty Bell. It is the story of the Israelites' search for freedom, is a storyline that cuts through much of the American story as well. And as one example of the impact of this beautiful song we call Torah, I have here words from a song by the great Bob Marley, who was a Rasta and wrote beautiful music. And he has a song called Redemption Song. And here's a verse from it. We've got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? Because all I ever had, redemption songs. All I ever had, redemption songs. These songs of freedom, songs of freedom. I invite you to, at some point, go online and find a recording of Bob Marley himself singing as a solo piece his redemption song. He wrote it during the final year of his life when he was suffering from cancer. When you hear him singing it by himself, it's really quite profound. And this notion about fulfilling the book by singing a song of redemption, that's what we're being called upon to do, I think, in this week's Torah portion. To remember that this whole song we call Torah is about a journey. It's about a journey from a narrowness, from a limitation, into a place of empowerment and expansion and taking hold of our destiny and becoming responsible, fully developed human beings. That's what the Song of Torah is all about. And that song has been so influential, so impactful across cultures and across time. And so many people have been inspired by this song that we call Torah, this stir to freedom, this awakening to the promise of responsibility and the homecoming it represents. So with that, I'd like to invite others to share your own particular insights and reflections and thoughts about this week's Torah portion. If you'd like to raise your hand, I'd love to call upon you.
Oh.
Go ahead, Margot, and then I'll call in
Margot.
Richard.
Yeah, I don't want to follow Richard because he's going to say something very profound, I'm sure. So I'm glad to go before him. But from the all familiar with the Negro spirit, which did just that, took from the Torah and were songs of redemption to get them to the promised place.
Yeah.
With their references are always to the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm. Again, the notions of inspiring that march towards freedom, beautifully put. And if you recall, in Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech in Washington in 1963, the only verses of scripture that he recited were from the Jewish Bible.
Yeah. And the slaves always, in their songs, have the Torah, the Old Testament.
Thank you. Thank you, Margot. And Richard?
Thank you. Well, this week, I was thinking about something David said last time about his response to that painting and how he got chills over it. And when I read this chapter, the Sidra, I found that there's two references to children. One is capital C, the children of Israel, meaning the sons and progeny of Jacob, of Israel. And then also little c, it's you tell your kids this story and put it on their lips so when they go out there and their adults keep worshiping the gods, they can find out what happened and it'll be on their hearts. And the ways in that ties to what I was thinking about what David said. I've been reading this week several history books about the Jewish experience, Sacker's book and Rabbi Trepp's book. And there are a lot, and they have different takes on different events. And you had talked, Rabbi, at one point about the difference between memory and history. Mm. And when I read these books about what happened in Italy and how they got moved to Spain and how they got suppressed in Spain and what happened in Germany and how they got all those people that died and were beaten up and killed. And it just welled up inside of me. And I'd been reading about my grandfather, who was in Belarus about the time Nazi was there. He was a young man himself, and their experience of being chased by the pogroms, and that's why they left as members of the Bund, and all the factions of Jews, and all the stuff that was going on, the things that are so awesomely horrible in life, and trying to learn to balance those. And where I'm going with is that suddenly it was all in there. It was as though I was not reading history, but it was remembered within my body. The whole music of that history was going through me. And that's what this study does. And hearing all these stories puts that in there. And then what do you do but say, I'm still here trying to carry this load out. Thank you for keeping me here. And that's the sound of Torah, the business of music and time being linked as one thing you can't have music unless there's movement from place to place with the notes. And that's why this song, that's why we stress so much teaching it to the children, teaching it to the children. And when it moves from being history to being something that's ingested and then expands your awareness by virtue of, oh, this is part of me. I'm a part of this song, as opposed to that's a story over there. And that's what I got out of this today. And thank you, David.
Susan, go ahead. Go ahead and unmute. Go ahead and unmute, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, because as you were speaking, I realized that some of my family and other people I know have invested a lot of time and energy in trying to trace our ancestors, doing genealogy work. And I realized it's so that we can hear their song.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
So Paul and Jay have their hands up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Let me call on Jay first. Jay, would you like to share something?
Thank you, Rabbi. Just coincidentally, I heard a very interesting quote today. History is not something received, but something you live through. That kind of struck me and reminds me that all these people we are reading about, they were living through it, and now we're living through them, essentially. That's all.
Thank you so much, Jay. And Paul.
Yeah, the word redemption. Up until today, and this reading, I understood redemption being common to, let's say, the slaves, the black slaves of the past, and the Jewish people who were slaves also, that there was a two-step process. One is, of course, to go from the slavery to non-slavery. That's step one. Step two is for those that go one step further and say, well, there's an olam haba. There's and not everybody says that, but there's a future world. And so, and here, of course, it just talks about freedom. But I would be curious about what redemption means more than that, for instance, other than, you know, the idea of the first step only, just freedom of slavery. Is there something else that's also implied?
Okay, thank you. And anyone else want to share at this point?
I just was
go ahead,
reading
Richard.
about redemption today as the Sabbath is what redeems us, the observance of the Sabbath, because that's the first step toward justice and equity, is the freedom of slavery. It makes justice happen in the world. And that was a definition of it, redemption that I came up with today, reading it this week.
Thanks.
You know, that reminds me, it's so important when we celebrate Shabbat. One of the most important things and most joyful things that we do is to sing. And because as you were all speaking, I was thinking about the role that song plays in one transmitting heritage, a story of origin and purpose, and of kind of bringing us back to our place of center. I think of all the cultures that sit around campfires or that sit around tables or that gather together in villages and sing songs that are ways of telling a story and of conveying a purpose, an origin of values. And they're just, it makes it's so much more profound, I think, for me, to hear that being transmitted than to hear it being transmitted in the form of a more frontal lecture, for example. that there's something about, as Rabbi Watkins says, the reverberating, the vibrational aspect of these words that carry us along rather than merely assault us frontally, perhaps as lectures sometimes do, that we are able to join in the song. We become part of the song. We carry the song along as much as the song carries us along. And so I just think it's so beautiful to think about this role that song plays in carrying us along, and then we become carriers of the song as well. So thank you all very much for kind of causing me to think about that aspect of song as an instructional piece, as a heritage piece, as a bit of connective tissue, if you will, within a culture. Okay. Mark Thompson.
I want to talk a little bit about the High Holiday experience at Temple Israel this past week. I was in the choir, and Cantor Finley was supposed to have shown up to sing the Stark version of the Kedusha, but he was unable to do that. And so instead, we sang the Lewandowski version of the Kedusha, which is what I learned under Rabbi Kelter's guidance. And we sang this version. And you were just talking about the connective tissue that I've spoken about too, is that when you bridge something from the time that you're 13 to the time that you're 60 years later, it's a very powerful experience. It's a very, it's moving. And I realized that music for me is even more than memory. It's a connection to my past, and it's a connection specifically to my father. I'll share this quite personal. It's difficult, but when my father passed away, I was still the cantor at Beth Shalom, and I couldn't sing for a couple of weeks because every time I sang, I heard my father's voice. It was that tender and that rich, and some of that had to dissipate for me to be able to be present outside of that memory and yet still sing with it, if you understand what I mean.
Yes.
So music for me and song for me is an expression of the soul. And I think it's a wonderful thing that we can all share.
And Mark Thompson, could you just remind us a little bit of how the Lewandowski Kedusha goes?
Yeah, I certainly will. Nekadesh, Nekadesh, Nekadesh et Shimcha ba'olam, Nekadesh et Shimcha ba'olam, Keshem shemakdishim oto bishmei maro. Kakatuv al yad niviecha, vekarazeh el zeh, ve'amar. And then everyone joins. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzavahot, Melech kol haaretz kevodo. Adir, Adirenu, Adir, Adirenu, Adonai, Adonai, Adonenu, Ma'adir, Ma'adir, Shimcha b'chol haaretz, Baruch kevod Adonai b'mkomo, Echad hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu, Hu Oshienu, V'hu Yashmienu, V'hu Yashmienu, Berachamav,
לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, לדור ודור. Hallelujah. I love it, Jay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was just stunning. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me to share it.
Thank you so
you.
much. Thank you. Let me ask, Deb, did you want to share something?
No, I guess what struck me also was the words were being taught to the priests and then the song to all the people, and just making Torah and Judaism accessible to everybody. And isn't that, was it the Hasidic or movement or whatever that emphasized song and joy and making it accessible to everybody, even?
Yes, well, certainly in the Hasidic world, this is what the Baal Shem Tov was all about. He says, don't worry if you don't know all the intricacies of the law. Don't worry if you don't know all the intricacies of Talmud. Don't worry. You have a song to sing. You have a song in your heart to sing. And if you express that, you are attaching yourself to God.
Right. And that's what it reminded me of, because it making it, the song being accessible to all the people, even if they didn't have the opportunity to necessarily have access to higher education like the priests with the reading. And
beautiful to make that connection. Thank you so much, Deb. Okay, and let me call on Paul and then Cheryl and Margot. Paul. Yeah, and you'll need to unmute Paul.
Your earlier comment about Yaakov and then Mark's comment, they're related to each other in that not always by song. When I was not such a good translator in the Yiddish classes that Yaakov had, but when he was reading the stories, those are the stories I read to my father from the Jewish newspapers. And so just like you knew what I knew what the next couple of words would be, when Yaakov started the lines, I knew already kind of what the sentence was going to be. And a lot of times, because my father always got newspapers from the people, other people in the building, there was always there was old newspapers. And so there was always like tomato seeds over certain words. And so I still to this day don't know the words of many words because they got covered. And I asked my father what it meant, and he told me it was none of my business. So that was his attitude toward my Yiddish learning. He just just because he just didn't want to buy glasses, and I was a yeshiva bacher, so he might as well get some use out of me. But the point of the matter is that this, like the song business of you remember things from way back. I mean, I'm 88 years old now, and I was reading those stories when I was 14 years old. But when Yaakov started, I knew the story already, and I realized I almost knew it line by line.
Yeah, to be a carrier of a story is a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for that. And Cheryl and Margot, go ahead, Cheryl. Go ahead and yeah.
I apologize if somebody else has made this statement because my computer kept freezing and I had to leave. What I thought when we were reading that portion about the song for the children of Israel, I thought about folk music. I thought about songs that everyone could sing, that the words and the melody would carry them along, and it might not have the depth of the scholarly knowledge that the Kohanim would have, but that it would be remembered and it would be easy to sing. And so people would sing it while they were working and while they were doing things, and it would become a part of them. And Rabbi, my version, my English translation, has the language of you will remember this against, that God will remember this against the Israelites. And I thought that was very interesting when you said that there are some translations that do not put it in that adverse way. And so that was another thought, that how different things are depending on the translation. My translation didn't even talk about songs, it talked about poems.
Shira, yes. So that the word Shira can be song, we can think of it as poem. Yes, thank you.
And the translation can make such a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's part of our job as well, is to infuse it with our sensibilities when we begin to translate. So, and then Margot?
I simply want to suggest that we ask Mark Thompson to end each of our get-togethers with a song of his choosing or a psalm of his choosing. It's such a pleasure to listen to him.
It's a great gift. It's a great gift. Thank you.
I just, Rabbi, I wanted to go back to the painting of Rene Serrano Rodriguez, and we were talking about music, and I'm also thinking about astronomy here. As I look at this painting, I see a defocused image of a star. If you enlarge a star with the telescope and you defocus it, what you see is what that painting shows. You've got an airy disk, and inside you've got another disk. And I was thinking about Kepler, who discovered the laws of planetary motion, and that he was trying to find within these motions of the planets, motions of the spheres, which became for him a musical oddity. It never really caught on, but that to be able to infuse spirituality and science that way, to me, is a wonderful thought.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. Yeah. I don't know why, but for some reason, what you just said reminded me of this quote from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. First we sing, then we believe. Okay, so thank you. And then Mark Levinstein, go ahead. Go ahead and unmute and share with us.
I think, Mark, you said something about how music touches your soul, connects your soul. I think it also connects our souls with one another. And it's a very powerful way of doing that. And just, as we were talking sometime in the last couple of months, I forget which Parsha, we were talking about memory and people with memory impairment and how music can help pull things out of people that they wouldn't otherwise remember. And just that real power of song and how it endures over time. And also, so Rabbi Rene Serrano Rodriguez, is English a second language for him, I would imagine?
I would imagine.
So I'm just wondering if that's a direct quote, how much of it is intentional and how much of it is serendipitous?
Right.
But either way, it's very powerful.
It is very powerful. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
So let me bring us to a point of conclusion for this evening by suggesting first that we have been singing this song together for quite a while, this song we call Torah, which is a song of freedom, a song of redemption, a way to move forward, a way to stay connected with one another, to bring forward into the present a heritage from the past to help us propel ourselves into the future. So as we all begin to get ready for Yom Kippur, I just want to encourage us all to realize that we are all bearers of songs, and that we have inherited a beautiful song which has inspired the world for thousands of years, and to use our voices to carry us forward through these remaining days of the Amim Noraim, these days of awe, and to be bearers of that awe, and to carry that with us to help create a beautiful, beautiful new year. Gemar Chatima Tova. May each one of us inscribe words of wonder and awe and goodness in this coming year. Thank you all very much for coming together and sharing. God bless you all and be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Gemar Chatima Tova.
Shana Tova, everyone.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.